What's up, Wait, it says live. I'm going to check my YouTube channel.
Yeah,
I'll obviously edit this part out. As soon as I saw that red button say live, that was my thought in my head, what I just yelled out. It says live. Have you seen that clip with Bill O'Reilly where he's like working? It's before he worked at Fox News and someone pisses him off when he's like recording and he's like, fuck it, we'll do it live. Fuck it. He's like trying to read. Oh my God, dude. If you haven't seen that, it's like one of the best clips ever. Obviously no one likes Bill O'Reilly, but that was hilarious. Okay, so it doesn't say I'm live. What's up, everyone? Welcome to Sir Hans Reviews. My name is Mark, and in this video, I am joined by Aziz from History of Westeros, and he's better known as a professor of the A Song of Ice and Fire, and we are going to discuss. Obviously, it's pretty extensive what happens during the Dance with Dragons, so we're kind of just going to cover the first part and mainly what's going to transpire in the show during this time frame. But without any further ado, Aziz, do you want to tell everybody a little bit about yourself and where they can find you at?
Sure thing, man. First of all, thanks for having me, Mark. This is cool. I'm glad we're getting to talk about the future of Game of Thrones on TV again. You know, it might be a little while still, but it's coming, and it's just a matter of waiting. And in the meantime, we get to talk about what's going to happen. We get to plan and think about all the possibilities, and that's super fun. Great thing to geek out on. So, I'm Aziz, like Mark said, and I am the podcaster over at History of Westeros. I've been doing this since about 2012, so I've been around. And
OG,
maybe, yeah. I love the books, love the show. And I never get tired of talking about it, hanging out, talking about it, and making videos and stuff. So you can find me over there on either, if you listen to podcasts, History of Westeros, or YouTube. Either way, that's where you find me.
All right, and I've linked the channel obviously down below in the description, so make sure you guys go check them out. Make sure you go subscribe. We've actually done, I think, a few different collabs before. I'll try to link those down below in the description.
So we've been climbing together in Nashville.
Yes, yes, we did.
That was cool.
We climbed the actual wall, and we didn't. It didn't take us nowhere near as long.
We really should have filmed that. We really should.
And that was I think I got a pretty good chunk of that, and it's on my phone because I use the same SD card from that. But yeah,
you did film some of that. Yeah, that's right.
And that was genuinely the first time I met you. I had never met you before.
Yeah, it was me and Sean. That was so cool.
Yeah, you guys came and picked me up from my hotel, and that was like the first introduction. So yeah, I consider us pretty good friends.
Yeah.
But so I've got obviously, if you guys want to follow along, I've got the wiki page for what kind of happens during that time frame. I'm going to be using that more as like a refresher for the name so I can attempt to pronounce them correctly. But like I said, we're going to cover what happens somewhat, and then we're going to mainly talk about what goes on in the show. And Aziz actually has like a full long drawn out version that he's doing with, I think he said Radio Westeros, and I could link that down below as well, so you guys can get that sort of format if you want. But we're going to mainly be talking about what could happen on the show potentially, not really who's going to be cast, because I feel like that's still up for grabs and they're still clearly writing the show. So we'll just kind of talk about how that's going to transpire in TV. But anyway, Aziz, do you want to kind of get us started off with like the events kind of surrounding that lead up to the actual Dance of the Dragons?
Hell yeah, let's do that. I think this is going to help us maybe figure out or give us an idea of what the show is going to do, because for all we know, they could start right in the thick of it. They could start with flashbacks. They got a lot of options on the table, but there's certain important events that they're going to want to include one way or another, whether it's flashback or whether they just straight up do it. And I think you could go back quite a ways to decide or to pinpoint when all this started, when it all started to go wrong. I think you start with when Jaehaerys and Alicent, who were possibly the greatest king and queen combo in Westeros history, and they certainly ruled a long time. Well, at one point they were confronted with the option of, well, who's going to inherit the throne? And they had, because the eldest son died. And the question was, well, will we let his daughter inherit, who is his first child, or pass it down to the next son? So that was the big question. Do you let it pass to the second son, or do you let it pass through the dead son into his daughter? And Jaehaerys said the son. Alicent was like, no, it should be the daughter. Well, Alicent was right. if you just go with the oldest, it's so much simpler. If you, no matter what, just say whoever's the oldest inherits. You don't have any problem. Well, you might still have a problem, but you don't have these arguments over who's actually next, because you always just go with the next in line oldest. That's simple. So I think that's, if you want to pinpoint when it all went wrong, I think that decision is a great option, because from there, arguments even between the king and queen started. And then 20 years, 40 years later, their kids are arguing about who comes next. And, you know, I'm simplifying, but eventually you get to the Dance of the Dragons. It all started with an argument that began, 60 some years prior. It was never resolved properly. And then there you go. War, blacks and greens going at it, because they didn't have a system in place to, define for sure who came next. That leeway enabled people to say, well, actually it should be us. And then next thing you know, dragons and swords and fire, and
all the good stuff that makes for epic television. So if we kind of want to relate that over to how the show House of the Dragon is gonna carry that, we do know that there's gonna be 10 episodes in the first season. So you can imagine the second, third, fourth, fifth, however long they plan to go, it'll be 10 until they wind down towards the end. With that being said, I don't know if they're not really known for doing flashbacks that much on the main television series. So I feel like to establish what you were just talking about, since that took place during Jaehaerys's reign, maybe we could get a simplified version in the opening episode, because I feel like it would be wise to start with where we got with greens versus the blacks. So maybe in the opening episode we have that tourney where that was established.
People could, the Jaehaerys Alicent stuff could be just to be brought up in dialogue. It's like, well, when my granddad did this, blah blah blah, or when my granddad, they could just a few lines of dialogue. They could accomplish a lot. Yeah, I don't think they have to film shoot whole scenes of that. As long as it's prominently mentioned. Maybe if they have a few different people mention it, so that it really sinks in.
Yeah.
But, but I agree. They need I think right away they're gonna, one of the first things they're gonna do is show that dividing line. Maybe not about the marriage choice, just some way or another, they're going to immediately show where the conflict lies, I think, and then just build from there and make it look, kind of get us to feel, oh, yeah, I can see why they're mad, or I can see why this is, they feel like they're being pushed aside, or I can feel like, oh, I can see he thinks he's going to get killed if he doesn't make his move. Things like that. You want to, bring in that conflict and make people take sides, or make it hard to take sides. I don't know, because it's hard to take sides on the blacks and the greens from a book perspective, isn't it? They both suck.
And I feel like people are gonna get mad because it's clear in Game of Thrones, the Lannisters in the first season, at least, the Lannisters are the bad guys, right? Yeah. And then as the show develops, we get to see more facets of their character, which gives us a different picture where we like some Lannisters, we don't like others. So I feel like with this one, no matter which way they decide, which I feel like the blacks are going to be sort of the Starks in this case, because they both have tragic shit happen to them, but the way she's just sort of skipping all the way to the end, doesn't she end up getting fed? And then and it's described as 6 bites or 7, and then 7, and then her son watching that, and then becoming, so skipping way ahead. But, I try not to name names because we'll get to that part eventually. But I feel like the blacks may be portrayed. And technically, if you want to do that with her being the oldest, it makes sense for her side to be portrayed as sort of the good guys at first. And then we start to see some of the treacherous stuff that she does along the way. And then it sort of grays, where it goes into that perfect Game of Thrones area where we don't really know who's right and who's wrong.
I like when you mentioned the Lannisters, though, because I think if you look at Rhaenyra, who's one of the main characters, most likely she's got a lot of Cersei vibes, but she's also got a lot of Daenerys vibes. She's half Cersei, half Daenerys. I mean, she's herself, but if you were to say which two characters is she most like, that's who I would name. And so a lot of people are going to be excited about that, because she's got that combo. She's got that aggressiveness. She's a dragon rider. She's got kids, but she's also been pushed aside, and things like that. So yeah, it's a lot of potential there. I'm excited for her. I can't wait to do the cast for her.
You just genuinely if we go back and watch this, you can see my face light up as you're describing that, because that's I started to like Cersei towards the end of season 7, right? and I liked her in season 8, and I feel like obviously we don't even need to bring that up, but I liked Cersei a lot. I
Yeah.
love Daenerys. We didn't get to see Daenerys. We got to see her ride dragons, but they kind of forgot and they died right away. Like we didn't get too much of that. But this show, we're gonna get that. We're gonna get that, and
Right away. There's no
so
waiting
much
for the
more of
dragons
it,
to grow
yes.
up.
And we get those wonderful aspects of Cersei, like she loves her children. We get all this, and she's a Targaryen, and it's like, oh man, and that's what makes me wonder too. It's like with the Red Keep, it's gonna feel so similar to Game of Thrones, but also so different. Dude, I cannot
It's
wait.
so cool. Yeah, I mean, it's going to be like, I mean, it's just like these other great franchises that have, you know, that have continued. Like, imagine, like, think back to when Star Wars like finally had a second trilogy. You know, it was like,
dude,
that was,
dude.
Of course, that's a much
People-
longer wait, but we went
Yes,
so
people
nuts
hate
for
on
that.
people hate on the Clone Wars and the sequels, but I guess the prequels. I grew up with that. I was 11, or like no, I was didn't Phantom Menace come out 99? I was 9 years old when that came out. Like I grew up with that Star Wars, and then you hear all the shit about it. And everybody's saying it's bad. Even back then, as a kid, I remember thinking like, "What? I watched the original Star Wars. This is even better because it looks way more realistic." So like, I was like easily, I didn't care so much about the story or the acting or any of that stuff. I just was like, dude, this looks way more realistic. So that's always made me a fan of them. And then now people are saying that the Clone Wars are, why do I keep calling that? The fucking prequels are better than the new Star Wars ones that came out. And like people are starting to hate on them less or whatever. But I don't know.
They have their merit, like whether or not you like those original movies, they introduced a bunch of characters that got used in other ways that are still interesting.
Yeah,
so,
like how could you not like?
You mentioned Clone Wars, like that is the thing. Like that show is fun and it has a lot of those same characters. So yeah,
yeah. I think I watched when it originally came out. It was like on Adult Swim or something, or like on the Toonami block, Cartoon Network or something. I watched it then, but I never watched it after that. I kind of like.
Okay.
I don't know.
I'm only watching it now. Like me and Ash are watching it right now. Good.
So yeah, just continuing on a little bit. I guess that not establishing early on the I guess primogeniture. I don't know, big word to use there, but
that's the one.
Is sort of what caused the Greens versus the Blacks, and this war itself is what led to the state that House Targaryen is in when the Game of Thrones story starts. Yeah,
like there's like 20 or 19 something dragons at the start of in the books anyway. We don't know what they'll do with the show. They may add or subtract from that, who knows, but it's going to be more than 3.
And they'll be full grown and we'll get to see like different sizes. That's what makes me okay with the fact that this show hasn't announced the cast yet, is they're probably worried more about having the time to like do you think they're going to bring on, I don't even know the name of like the CGI company that did all that stuff, but they would obviously use those same people to do that. But just the fact that you're basically starting off in the season 8 level of CGI and effects in the first season, if they're going to do it right how we think, it makes me accepting of how long it's taking to sort of like announce all this stuff.
Yeah, but of course, the COVID slowdown is part of it. I mean, they weren't already filming, so it wasn't like a shutdown production, but like they can't start yet either. I don't think they were ready to, but I don't think COVID's hurt them that much, but it obviously hasn't helped.
Yeah, I feel like maybe some of the actors who know about it or know about some of the roles coming up might be sending in like audition tapes. Maybe Ryan Condal and George and Miguel Sapochnik have started looking, but we're not going to know any of that stuff until they physically go to a location. And then obviously keeping along with themes of Game of Thrones, we're going to find out right away. Especially since all those people who did all that stuff have had 3 years off to sort of advance their craft. And, drones are always getting better. So
they are. Yeah, it's true, man. They've already announced the budget's going to be way larger than Game of Thrones season 1. It's going to be more in line with later Game of Thrones seasons than early ones. So you're right. Like, and of course they need to if they're going to have dragons, which that's a guarantee. And like you said, they want it to look really good right away. They can't. It's already a big franchise, so they can't. They have to play like a big franchise. They're not like an up and coming franchise like season 1 and season 2 was. So they got to hit the ground running, or hit the air flying, as it were.
Yeah, and,
Yeah, I can't wait to see what they do. There are gonna be so many different colors of dragons. Like we're gonna see blue, we're gonna see red, probably. We're gonna see like weird, pink.
Yeah, isn't Aegon? Isn't I guess Aegon the second? Isn't Sunfire his dragon? Isn't it supposed to be like the most marvelous of like all the colors of dragons?
Exactly,
I guess?
golden with like pink membranes on her wings or something like that. It's
Yeah,
so
dude,
that
gorgeous,
sounds incredible.
Yeah, so imagine how pretty she looks at the start, and then at the end. Like that scene in Dragonstone. Oh my god!
Up.
Oh yes, so awesome. And like, can she not basically fly because her wing is almost like ripped off or something? Like, dude,
yep.
Oh my god, that's gonna be so awesome. All right, so just kind of picking back up a little bit. We'll start off. I'll go ahead and just sort of describe the like the small council meeting, basically what happened right after Viserys the first died. And we know Viserys is Daenerys's brother. Is he Viserys 2 or 3? Is there another Viserys other than
he would have been the third if he had ever been crowned, but he was not crowned. But I guess you could say he was maybe Viserys the third, because there was a second that was the
well, he was crowned, just not in the traditional sense.
Yeah. Viserys the second is the brother of Aegon the third. So the king who comes out at the end of all this it's his younger brother that becomes king after him. Or not after him, but after all his sons die.
All right.
He's a lot like Tywin with a better personality.
Yeah. All right. So basically, once Viserys died, Queen Alicent and Kristen Cole and a few of the other lords from that time immediately had like this sort of closed door small council meeting where it was declared that her son would be declared king as opposed to Rhaenyra. Yeah. So when they did this, I can't remember the guy's name, but one dude disagreed, and just to show you how things are escalating quickly. So Kristen Cole, who was a Kingsguard member,
he was Lord Commander, yeah.
Lord Commander, yeah. So he basically opened the dude's throat. It's like debated on whether he was like pushed from a window or something like that, or whether he just had his throat slit right there on the table. But people were pretty much forced to kind of go along with her. And do you want to pick up from there?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, so that was Lyman Beesbury, an older guy, had been around for a while, so it's kind of a big deal. Even though he was older, it was a big deal that he was killed because he had been Master of Coin for quite a while, like 30, 40 years. So he was pretty well respected. So that was a really aggressive thing to do. Just kill a guy at council for speaking up. And Rhaenyra herself, who was supposed to be anointed queen, that was who Viserys picked. She's 8 months pregnant, sitting on Dragonstone, so she's kind of out of it, like literally out of it. So while she's finishing off her pregnancy in the last stages there, about a month left, all this is happening over at King's Landing, and the other side has made their move and taken the throne right out from under her, and she gets understandably upset when she finds out, and it causes her to miscarry. Well, she thinks so. I mean, you're not at 8 months. The child came out all deformed, like something was very badly wrong. But she blamed them for it. And whether or not it's their fault, they certainly stole her throne, from her perspective anyway, and it started to go bad from there. Now, they didn't start off to straight go to war, because even as mad as they were with each other, maybe there's a way they can resolve this, because after all, they both sides have dragons. They know it's going to be nasty if they go to fight. Neither side really wants that.
It's sort of like the U.S. like with mutual insured destruction or whatever.
You're right, because dragons are not defensive weapons; they're aggressive. Like if dragons, they breathe fire. They have teeth and claws. They don't stop attacks so much as they can start them. Like when two dragons go to fight each other, usually they both get messed up. Like neither of them is going to come out of it. Even the winner is going to be permanently messed up, unless one of them's just way, way bigger than the other, way older than the other. So yeah, they're very much attack, not defend type things. Mm-hmm. And so that's really bad, right? The Greens, though, they made their move in a way that it looked like they had it. They did it so thoroughly. They were like, look, Storm's End's on our side. Some of these were assumptions. They thought Storm's End was on their side. They thought the Tyrells would be with them. They thought all these other houses would be with them. And they were right on some of those cases, but they weren't fully right they thought they had enough of it on lockdown that there would be peace. They'd be like, well, Rhaenyra is not going to stand up against this. We got 90% of the realm. She's not going to fight back. She's just going to have to say, okay, fine, you win. But they were wrong for two reasons. One, Rhaenyra is a lot more stubborn than they thought. She's a bit like Stannis here, where she's like, what? No, I'm the rightful queen. I'm not giving up no matter what. So
it's ironic that she's at Dragonstone.
Yeah, Stannis vibes for sure, right? She's like, no, I'm not giving up. Are you kidding me? Hell no.
Sure.
But this Stannis has 5 kids and some dragons and
yeah. Didn't they? How many did they have on Dragonstone? So that I know we're skipping ahead again, but weren't there like 8 or something that hadn't been claimed yet?
Something so like 8 plus like smaller ones that were too small to ride, but would eventually be. It was like Dragonstone was like the dragon factory. Like that's where the eggs hatched, because the dragon pit was there, but that was just for storing the dragons at court. Like the big ones would hang out there, but still most of them were raised and hatched and at Dragonstone, and then the wild dragons would hang out there too. And eventually, as we know, some of the wild dragons entered the picture as well. They became less wild. But yeah, so they had so that was a pretty big advantage. That they counted that as one of their a big strategic advantage for them. They're like, well, maybe even if the Greens are more powerful than us, they can't come here just to attack us either. They're like, just like Stannis was like, well, we may be low on manpower, but attacking Dragonstone is a big deal. Like we saw it on TV. Like imagine having a full complement of soldiers and dragons to defend that place. I mean, I just said dragons aren't that defensive, but they can torch ships that are coming for the island. So,
well, yeah, they do mention that armies are needed to like hold cities. You know, dragons take cities, but armies hold them.
Yes, well said. Yeah, man, that's true. That's true in the modern sense. Like air forces don't take cities; they just open it up so the army can walk in and make it easy on them. But they can't. You can't land a plane in a hostile area.
All right, guys, don't come over here. I got my plane here.
So you can see how this just like becomes a big mess. Like both sides think they have the right. One side thinks they have an advantage, but they're overestimating their advantage. Yeah, and they don't capitalize on it. The other side is like really determined and has some pretty significant tools on their side, even if it's not enough. And they know how, and we all seen how it goes in regular Game of Thrones. If someone switches sides or someone important dies, that can change the course of the war. So even if it looks bad at the start, a couple of small things can change and the picture flips, right? So
yeah, like for instance, TV show. I know it's similar to this in the books. Tywin, I guess, is poisoned, or it's assumed that he's poisoned along with Tyrion killing him. But we had the Red Wedding, and then within a few episodes, we had Joffrey die, and then Tywin dying. So it's like that kind of stuff continues in this story. And it's
Tywin's death was huge, right? Like everybody's like, oh, now they're weaker.
Yeah. So like stuff like that happens a lot. So there's betrayals. Like for instance, at one point, doesn't Rhaenyra, like we were just talking about the dragon seeds and stuff, she offers them to try to go get a dragon. Most of them are eaten, but the ones that do end up taming a dragon, she sends them certain places, and they end up betraying her without giving away too much. They end up betraying her and burning the I guess the blacks that were encamped in the city at one point. Like we have stuff like that happening. So it's I can't fucking wait. But just to sort of
right, man. I mean, they're probably going to change a little of that stuff, but it's the same thing. You got like a guy who's raised as a commoner, who's like a blacksmith or something like that. All of a sudden, there's an open call to like try to ride this dragon if you can. If you think you might have a Targaryen or Valyrian parent somewhere in your background, you can take a shot at riding this dragon.
I'm like 54% English, so at some point,
So like a bunch of people are like, well, I may as well take my chance. If I die, I die. Like brave people, it's a way to get out of the dust, because man, being a commoner in Westeros has got to be pretty rough. Next thing you know, you're a dragon rider. You're one of the most revered, dangerous people in the whole continent. So you can imagine why that might go to your head, right? Some people are like, yeah, well, I'm not just your ally. Now I'm like, I want a seat at the table. I'm a dragon rider.
Yeah, I'm gonna try to maneuver myself into a better position. It's like when you give power to someone who has never had it before. They don't really know what to do with it. So it's kind of like, or I guess when you give money to someone who's never had it before, you just kind of like, you know what I mean?
People just like go nuts and like go spend it all and like have no self-control. Imagine like it's that version, but a dragon
winning the lottery. Yeah, it's like winning the lottery. So like, yeah. So just kind of, we kind of talk about a little bit of what happened surrounding it and a little bit at the start of it. But like you said, they hadn't really gone full out war yet. There was still the, I guess, diplomatic relations.
There was still hope that it could be peaceably resolved. But of course, it did not go that way. There was the phase that often comes that we saw also in regular Game of Thrones when people are trying to figure out who's on their side and who isn't. And so we see lots of ravens flying, just like Stannis sent out all the letters, and then Cersei responded by sending letters of her own to everyone to counteract the rumors about the bastardy and all that. So we're going to see something similar to that, but they're not going to be, but with some pretty big differences too. But basically it's the same thing, like figuring out who's on your side, who you can count on. And then throughout that process, there's going to be people that are going to say, yes, we're with you. But really they're like ready to switch sides on a dime if something changes. So, so there's lots of that where like, you never know what side someone's on, but more so than the first show where like in the North, there's the Boltons and they screwed things up by doing their own thing. But most of the regions were pretty united. Like the Riverlands were pretty much all on the same team. The West was pretty much all on the same team. The Stormlands was pretty much all on the same team. Dorne was not on the same team. They fought each other, but they eventually got on the same team with themselves too. That is not the case here. You got a common thing we're going to see if the show decides to go this way, and I hope they do because it's pretty interesting, is just your neighbor could be on the other side of you. And then like 3 weeks later, they could be on your side again. And then you've switched sides. So that
it's like the American Civil War.
Yeah.
Brothers fought against brothers. Yeah.
Very similar to that, but like with probably even less of a north-south distinction. It's just like there's no north, there's no south. It's blacks and greens, and there's no it's not that you can't tell necessarily geographically. There's some exceptions, right? Like the north was pretty much all on the black side, and the reach for the high towers were like very green, and most of their vassals were too. But there's, for the most part, it was like you don't know who's going to take what side. It's a big mess. So that I think they could have a lot of fun with that, showing that on TV, just like who's on what side and what decisions what factors they lead to each decision. They're going to get things wrong. They're going to have the wrong impression. They're like, oh, well, this side is doing this, and it's not even going to be true because they got lied to.
Yeah, can you just imagine the casting director, how many similar people they're gonna have to find?
Yeah, I wonder how they're gonna deal with that. Like, well, let's change. Let's take one less egg on here.
Yeah, because technically Rhaegar and Robert are cousins, and we saw they look nothing alike on the TV show. So we I mean, I don't know. It's gonna be nuts. It's gonna be crazy.
Yeah.
So I guess we have we have the prelude, which we kind of talked about a little bit, that the buildup is not establishing proper who falls in the primogeniture of the line, not establishing that clearly. And then when it comes up, obviously a few years later, when it comes in question, that's when this all sort of falls apart. And we talked about that a little bit right as soon as King Viserys I dies, Queen Alicent has the small council meeting where she declares her son as the rightful king. And then there's still a bunch of diplomacies. Without getting into too much detail, we kind of have it coming to a head with the coronation of, I guess, Aegon II. Yep. Do you kind of want to let us know what happened, sort of summarized around
Yeah,
it?
well, Aegon II does have a lot in common with Joffrey. He's not as quite as crazy, and he's not as quite as cruel, and he's older and had his own kids and things like that, but he's also kind of like not very capable. He's not super smart guy, more like his family is kind of leading him and telling him what to do, and he occasionally screws things up because he mostly he was raised with no expectations. Like his whole life he didn't expect to be king. It wasn't his ambition to be king. It was his family that was like, look, man, you should be king. And finally they told him, look, if you're not king, they're going to kill you. And that was what finally got him moving. Because at first he was like, who steals his sister's throne? And so, but he would spend all his time like hanging out with sex workers and drinking and just partying. So like, imagine if Joffrey wasn't raised to be king, he was raised to be the like farther down the line. Like he was supposed to be like the third son or something like that. That's kind of like, so he was sort of turning into Robert, right? He was like, well, I got nothing to do. I'm just going to drink and sleep around and just be a prince, a rich, a prince that's got no responsibilities. So that he wasn't exactly brought up like to be a good king. He was brought up to kind of do nothing. So it's just the guy that's like all of a sudden is in charge. And so you can imagine that once he starts making his own decisions, they're not always very good decisions. So that's a big part of it. Like, why do you want this guy to be king exactly? But Alicent's pretty smart, and Kristen Cole's no dummy either. So the people around him, you know, they're not dummies. They're clever enough and ruthless too. They're really willing to go really far with it. So it's an interesting combination of like, you got this guy that's kind of inept at the top, but he's surrounded by pretty capable advisors and counselors. So it's not like Cersei leading, you know. Cersei was like smart and cunning, but she would get really angry and make mistakes all the time. And,
and cut off all of her ties. Like, you know, you kind of need a group of people that are going to offer you all opinions of the matter, like, so you could see all different sides from it. And as soon as you don't have that, you're kind of, you know,
you're an echo chamber or whatever. Yeah, and that's a good point, because like Alicent was her father was Hand of the King, Otto Hightower, and he's quite capable as well, and he understood being patient and gathering consensus and writing letters, and he's a little bit like Tywin without the ruthlessness. Like, he's a good administrator and a good, you know, guy to support the family, but he wasn't as much of a take charge kind of guy. Although that's the book version. Who knows what the show version could be an entirely different type. They might decide to turn him up a notch and make him like bloody or something. Who knows? That could be interesting. You know, imagine like Tywin v part 2, but
I think that's probably, like, obviously it works better in the books because there's more characters that can kind of fill that role when a certain character dies. But in the TV show, that's one of the biggest faults, I feel like, is they kill off Robb Cat. They have to, because that's how the story goes. But they kill off Robb, Catelyn, Tywin. Tyrion isn't around the same people that he's around, so he doesn't have as strong of scene partners. You know, all that happens back to back, and then that's when people unanimously say the show fell off in season 5 when we didn't have any of that stuff. So hopefully with this story, we'll have such a bigger budget to start out with. They're going to be able to afford to have more focus on more characters. So when one of them dies, it's not that crucial of a hit to the show, where it's like, you know, regardless whether you like Tywin or not, any person he was in a scene with, he elevated them because the actor was so good.
Oh man,
that's like, I'm not saying that Kit Harington and Emilia Clarke and Sophie Turner and Maisie Williams didn't have a strong presence as them, but they didn't have nowhere near the body as Charles Dance did. You know what I mean? So it's like, it's just, it makes it harder. It puts more on them. And because of that, sometimes the writing might be there, but the actor isn't portraying that in the scene. So you say, okay, the writing's not there. The show feels bad because it doesn't feel real. Like, people were talking about how that scene where Jon rides the dragon is like, is some Disney-esque scene. I enjoyed it, but that's because I removed all of like everything that would make me judge it negatively like that. I'm just like, this is an awesome moment. I've been waiting X amount of years to see it. But I feel like sometimes that sort of happens. I don't know.
No, you're right. And the big difference too is that they have they can map the whole thing out. Like, they didn't sit down and map out 8 seasons of Game of Thrones when they started. They were told that they would have it. So like, as soon as they're left to their own creative devices, you can see it in the Dorne plot. You're like, what the fuck is this? These lines are so bad pussy. Like, what? Come on, dude. Like, no one's gonna write that. Come on.
And
they have a writing room. They have a writing room this time. It's a squad rather than they're going to hand it off to individuals. And there's more diversity in the writers' room. They're just going to handle. I think they're not going to make. I mean, who knows how good it's going to be? I just am confident they won't make some of those same mistakes. You know.
Well, when you, like you said, when you have a clear beginning, middle, and end, you know what to do. You know what characters to cut. They're thinking, okay, maybe they asked George, is Fagon going to amount to anything in the books? George tells them no. Well, we don't even need to include him in season 6 because we're going to be wrapping up this show in 11 episodes, so we can't
Yeah.
we can't afford to put those storylines in. But does he play a role in the end, a big enough role where it's going to change the ending somewhat, even though he may be a false pretender? Well, maybe, but we don't know that. You know what I mean? Or they didn't know that. D&D didn't know that. So
Yeah.
now with this show, we know how it ends because it was in the past. So regardless, everybody dies. And, so I don't know. It's set in stone. They have a good Bible, if you will, and the guy that's writing the show's Bible, Ryan Condal, isn't he? I haven't seen hardly any of Colony. I watched a little bit of like the first episode, but you could tell this guy knows what he's doing. And a lot of people that have watched Colony said it's pretty good. So I trust in him. I
like the group they've assembled too, because they've got they've also got T. McKella, who was George's assistant, and she was in charge of helping. Like she was really a big part of keeping George's info straight. So that's like, she's maybe like, you could say she's sort of the equivalent of Brian Cogman. Like Cogman was the guy who knew the material the most, best out of it in that group of people.
They always
is on that level. She knows it all, and she knows George better than Brian Cogman ever did. So she like has a more direct route to him for any like clarifications. So
which is
it's
awesome.
just a better setup. They just have a better setup this time.
Yeah, and I feel like since part of that fear was in Game of Thrones was not knowing if certain things would work, and sometimes they felt like if they had done certain plot lines from the books, it would have seemed a little bit too unbelievable to follow up with some of those. So they chose to leave them out to make the show a bit more realistic, I guess. But now they've seen what works, they've seen what doesn't work, they've seen fans' criticism online, at least, of what the last season lacked, which is basically. Yeah. See, I feel like season 7 had a full 10 episodes, season 8 had a full 10 episodes, and then we had a 6-season episode 9. They would have maybe been able to wrap it up a lot better. But
yeah, it was rushed. Yeah, no doubt.
They have that privilege of seeing all that stuff now. They know what gets people. They know what provocative works or that sort of nature works for the show. It gets people talking about. They know what works and what doesn't, is what I'm trying to say. So,
and they tried to cut so much of the magic out, which I think that was kind of a mistake. Is like, I think having not to get too deep into it, but like that's such a big part of what was lacking from Dany's storyline, was like that. She stopped trusting people and started leaning more on prophecy, but they didn't have the prophecy very much in TV. So that was like, well, they just have to go with madness.
Let's kill everybody.
Yeah. So it just
let's force her to be insane.
Prophecy would have fit so much better, and that's how the books are going. So I think that's going to happen too here. Like in House of the Dragon, we've got this really cool stuff in the north with like possibly a northern girl and a southern and a Targaryen like falling for each other, which they might deal with that. And you got the option for them to bring up this Alice Rivers character, who's like who eventually gets the title of the Witch Queen of Harrenhal, like after the dances. Like they get all kinds of cool stuff you could easily see them just chopping that, be like, we don't have time for that. But they could also see them including it and it being wicked cool and being like, hell yeah. I feel like they include more of those storylines that may not necessarily go somewhere in the earlier seasons of Game of Thrones. So I feel like this show, that's another thing too, is it might have been harder to convince HBO higher ups to go all out, whereas now they don't have to, because they know it's the highest grossing anything of all time they've ever done. So, and they know that they're not worried about the public and fantasy. Like that was a thing. They were like, I don't know about this. People are like, nah. Lord of the Rings is making a show. Wheel of Time's making a show.
Yeah, and they
The Witcher exists. I mean, there's like
they have literally $1 billion as their budget for the first season. So it's all up for grabs, buddy. Like, I don't know. I feel like HBO Max was made by HBO just so that they could put all their content out there and start sourcing money to fund this show, because it's gonna, they're going to need as much money as possible. But I was mentioning this last night in my live stream. At the point when this video is up, it was probably a few nights ago. But regardless, and I want to get your opinion on this, and then I guess we'll just mention one or two more things from the Dance of Dragons, and then we'll just wrap it up and do a part 2 where we can kind of, if you want to come back on. But I feel like even though season 8 is unanimously panned online, whereas all of the Game of Thrones YouTubers, for the most part, all of Reddit /free folk, all of the Reddit or the subreddits about Game of Thrones, all the comments, all the tweets that you see online, you would think it's unanimously panned. But my whole thing is that's a small percentage of the audience. It's maybe 30% of the people that watch the show. When you take into account all the people that watch Game of Thrones videos on YouTube, when you add all those views up together, it's not the amount of people that watch the show. You know what I mean? And a lot of those are repeated numbers because they're the same people watching different videos. So when you look at all the people that watch the show and never go online, all the people that download the show and don't go online because they're in another country, why would they go and read a bunch of English shit? Because you know what I mean? So when
you're totally right.
Exactly. There's so much more people that have seen the show that don't know about all that. And you can ask someone who has no attachment to any sort of social media with Game of Thrones, has no outside influence on their opinion other than them just watching a TV show. Most of them don't really have that big of an issue with season 8.
Yeah, I agree. You know, it was more disappointing for the really dedicated fans, and it was less of a problem for the less dedicated fans because they didn't notice like the incompleted plot lines. Because they weren't as aware of them. You know, it's like you can't be disappointed by something you didn't notice. You know, I mean, that's not a dig at anyone because that's true for me on plenty of other shows that I only watch once. There's probably plenty of shows where I thought that was pretty good. Like someone who's like a real fan of that show might be like, "Are you kidding me? That was terrible."
Yeah.
You know, like, well, from my perspective, it was fine. So,
there were people like that with The Witcher.
You know? Yeah, it's true. Yeah, they just didn't give it. Some people didn't give it much of a chance. But bottom line is, The Witcher was their most popular show of 2019. So, like,
I loved it. I've never played the games or anything. I was like, dude, this is awesome.
Yeah. Books are great too.
Yeah. Well, to be fair, that dragon fucking took me out of it. I was like, what is this? That is,
if you're used to Game of Thrones dragons, it was like,
well, not only that was like, have you ever seen that old sci-fi movie where, God, who's the actor? It's not a sci-fi movie, but it came on sci-fi a lot. It's like, I can't remember, but basically the dragon is voiced by Sean Connery.
Oh, is it Dragon Slayer? I think it's just called Dragon Slayer.
The Dragon Rider, something like that. That's how bad
George R. R. Martin loves that movie, bro. One of the dragons is called Villa. I can't remember the name, but he named Vermax and Vermithor. Yeah, it's Vermithrax. That's the dragon in that movie. Is Vermithrax. So the dragons in the Dance of Dragons, Vermax and Vermithor, are references to Vermithrax from that movie. George is like dropped those dragons right into Song of Ice and Fire.
Yeah, I like the movie. I'm just saying like the effects of the dragon in that movie are similar to what just an updated version of it. I feel like Netflix ran out of money and I don't know. Looks,
no, you're right. It's a bit also nothing. It's just also just like no one's ever gonna have dragons that look as good as Game of Thrones' dragons. Maybe the occasional movie budget will, but like
that's why it's so hard for me to cover other shows and movies is because my standards are so high. I'll watch something
that bar so much.
Yeah, dude, like I'll watch something all day, but do I want to take the time to learn enough about it to make a video on it? I don't know. It's not Game of Thrones, you know, so I don't know. But yeah, just to sort of wrap this up, I think the last big thing that we should talk about is probably what happens with Blood and Cheese. I feel like that's one of the more epic moments. Just to sort of lead us into it, I'm gonna pass it off to my wizard, in-house expert.
So this is really cool because it has implications on the rest of A Song of Ice and Fire too, which is that the tunnels get used in this. So pay close attention to how this could apply to, say, Arya or somebody going back through these tunnels. Okay, so what we have happen is during this series of events where the two sides are trying to figure out who's with them and who's against them, a very bad luck event happens where two dragons show up at the same place at the same time. I kind of guess this is still going to happen on the show, but whatever. In the fallout of this is one of the dragons is a lot bigger than the other, and these two have bad blood from before. Real bad blood. One of them is already kind of an aggressive, nasty dude, and he has a pretty valid reason to hate the other one. So he like gets in his face, and eventually they fight, and one of them and the smaller dragon is killed, and his rider. And so that's one of Rhaenyra's sons, so she's understandably upset. That's one of the princes, and she's like, no, this is bad. And her husband's like, I got this. We're going to take out one of theirs. instead. So you can see how this is going downhill fast. You're like, one son is killed, well, we'll kill one of theirs. And this is brutal, man. They figure out how to sneak through the Red Keep and go through these tunnels. And this is the event that changed everything, because after this, no one was allowed to use these tunnels anymore. It only took people like Varys and others who had to figure out the tunnels on their own. They stopped letting regular people go in there, because it was a rat catcher of all things. It's like, let the rat catcher knows these tunnels. He'll guide a thug through the tunnels to a secret passageway that opens up right in the princess's, one of the, or rather the Queen Dowager's rooms. And they take the king's sons, Aegon II's sons and his daughter, and are like, we're going to kill one of your sons. Which one you want to live? So that's, they make the mother choose. That's brutal. And so they kill one of the sons and then they run away. They get captured, and the laws change immediately. The king gets so mad, he orders the death of all the rat catchers. And so you've got a prince dead on both sides, and both mothers are like, that's it. We're out for blood now. The two of the most powerful people on each side have lost a son. What can be more personal than that? So, you lose your son. I mean, that's just it's hard to be rational at that point, whether you're a real person or a fictional person. You can understand that, I think. And so there's no going back from that point. It just goes all downhill from there. More and more people start to take sides. More people hear about this. It's an outrage. Like, they did what? They killed who? How did they did it this way? And that's when the battle lines are really drawn. So it's easy to see why there was no compromising once that happened.
Yeah, I feel like this would be a good either season 1 finale or season 2 finale.
Ooh,
I don't know about season 1, because I feel like that they would be skipping a bunch of shit to do that. But it has to be serialized for television. So, but I feel like, and I think you mentioned it, like when they make her choose, and then they choose the opposite. So that kid has to live his entire life, you know what I mean, knowing that his mom thought that he would be the one that died. Basically, I don't know.
Yeah,
it's sick, dude. It's so sick.
Yeah, the lives of these princes that are so like, they on one hand they have these like privileged upbringings where they never want for anything, but on the other hand, they can become such targets just like that for brutality to be made an example out of. So yeah, it's not all nice for them. There's a real downside.
Yeah, and I think that's what's going to be. That's how the show's going to start. They're going to show you the amount of power that the Targaryens have by obviously establishing their rule over the Seven Kingdoms, but also showing you how kind of like at peace the realm sort of is before this stuff kind of just goes off the rails fully. So maybe we'll get to see like these kids in a certain time, like, how we get to see Arya and Jon and everybody in Winterfell in the first episode where they're like a family, and then right after that they get scattered to the winds. I feel like that would be a really cool dynamic to see that from the Targaryen side.
Having us like this kid before he's murdered, like us like have a reason to be like, oh, this is a cool kid. He's like honest and like does cool stuff or whatever, and then all of a sudden, like, oh, that is. I think you're right. They're gonna do that. They're gonna like pull some heartstrings. They're gonna make us like these characters, and then start slaughtering them in awful.
And they have a way of like making some of the most brutal scenes more intense in the TV show. Like a scene that does happen in the books, they'll sort of take privilege with it and make it more crazy. So maybe they'll do something instead of like slit or what is it? Blood lops his head off in like one clean swing. Maybe he'll do it and it gets stuck halfway, and then he has to kick the neck like from like his blade gets stuck or something. Like I don't know.
Gross,
like,
man.
Yeah.
We need to get you in that writing room.
Yeah, I don't know. Because they do stuff like that. Like I can't think of a particular example right now, but there are certain events in the books that when they do it on the TV show, I guess Sansa being raped, it's Jane Poole in the books. Someone pretending to be Arya. I think it's actually more intense in the books because Theon's not like just watching. So I don't know.
Yeah.
Was there
They can do
was
that
th-
too, but I think actually Theon's a great point. Like there's going to probably be some of that too, where there's characters that we don't like at first that there's a chance to see them in a different light eventually. I mean,
Mhm.
some people still never liked Theon because they just couldn't forgive what he did, but a lot of people did, or at least judged him kind of like a little column A, a little column B. I think there's going to be a lot of ambiguity as well because there's
Yeah.
characters going to be good. There's going to be good people fighting for bad people, you know.
Yeah. And people that are forced to do stuff like with Theon, like
Yeah.
I mean, he went back home wanting to bring his father on Rob's side. It was the intense, which I guess, I mean, you gotta, if you think that Theon, if you still completely hated him in the end, well, then you don't have a heart. Because, or you need to go back and rewatch how crazy it was for him to go home and his dad's such a piece of shit where he's like, you're wearing northern clothes, like, you know what I mean? Telling him he's dressed like a little bitch, basically, and saying, like, you know, you're not my son. Like, the ultimate sign is when he walks up to him and he just yanks his collar off him and he asks him, he says, did you pay the iron price for that? And he's like, nah, I paid gold. I didn't kill anybody for this chain, if that's what you're asking. And he just snatches it off him. He strips him down. And it's the same thing that Ramsay does. Ramsay breaks him down. So it's like,
yeah. Oh yeah. It's amazing because they're both of those characters are very motivated by like major daddy issues. And I mean, Ramsay and Theon, they both at the same time try to do the same thing to please their father, which is, you know, capture Winterfell and for their squad. So it's like, it's amazing how that comes together. And that sort of energy is going to be all over House of the Dragon. I think where like they're trying to move up in the world or impress their father or their mother. And
it's gonna be crazy.
It's not gonna go well.
It's gonna be so awesome, dude. It's gonna be everything about Game of Thrones and more. Like, this is gonna be one of those rare spinoffs that's better than the original. Like, in my opinion, okay, like obviously the Game of Thrones story is still being told right now, but I just prefer dragons when everyone has some mystical power or the ability to bend fire, whatever. When every character's like that, it makes it a better story because the people who don't have that lineage or don't have that power or whatever are forced to become a certain type of person to, like, it's like why Batman's probably my favorite superhero. He doesn't have any powers. He has to use, you know, shit to make shit get done. You know what I mean? Like, I don't know. But yeah, I feel like that kind of wraps this up, and we'll be doing a part 2. I'm not sure when, but we'll definitely get that out. Aziz, did you want to tell everybody again where they can find you at or what you got planned? Any videos you got planned?
Absolutely. Yeah. Thanks for having me on again. My channel is History of Westeros. Right now, we're doing a full reread of the series. We thought it would be good to take a second look at the books after the show finished to kind of look at all the different things the show did and see if we can kind of figure out what's what and what the books are going to do, and also just review all the things the show left out, which, as we know, there's a lot of things. There's like 60 plus plot lines that didn't make it into the show. We stopped.
They kind of forgot.
Yeah, there's more and more, and they didn't have room for all that. They couldn't have possibly done it all. But so that's our main focus. I also did start. We mentioned The Witcher in this video, so may as well plug my new podcast called The Podcast of Surprise. We're doing covering The Witcher. Right now, we're just covering the short stories. We'll eventually cover the TV show when it comes back. So that's just started. We've only got 4 episodes right now, but I'll definitely want to throw that out as a plug. For any Witcher fans out there, give that a shot. Pod of Surprise. But my Song of Ice and Fire stuff is History of Westeros. That's podcast and YouTube. Check us out. And we'll be back to do another part 2 and maybe beyond with you there, Mark. That'll be cool.
No doubt. And I've linked that down below. I've linked his channel down below in the description, and I'll try to link. Not try to. I will. I'll link the House of the Dragon, the Dance of Dragons that you've been working on with Radio Westeros too, so you guys can get more like of an in-depth dive into it. But yeah, thank you all so much for watching. If you could please slap a like on this video, the like goal is going to be 100. Also make sure you're subscribed and turn your notifications on so that you get alerted every single time I drop a video or decide to go live or anything like that in the future. My name's Mark. This has been Sir Hunts. Thanks again, Aziz Reviews.